Hello, audience, and Dr. Rogu is not able to join us today, but we have a wonderful guest today, someone I had the pleasure of meeting at a Sanofi event on type 1 diabetes and taught me a great amount of how to do storytelling and explain complex data to other physicians. Simone is an award-winning broadcaster and writer who's helped thousands of people communicate confidently and effectively. His professional career started on the BBC radio 30 years ago and moved into live television, presenting on BBC One and ITV before becoming a successful comedy writer for TV and radio. He still writes for primetime BBC One comedy show, and he's author of two books, one of which won the London Book Festival. He's also an educator for many industries on how to communicate to large and small audiences. Welcome, Simone. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Good to see you, Herb. Can I call you Herb? Is that okay?
Please call me Herb.
It's lovely to see you again. I'm going to help you out with my name because it's easy to mispronounce it. So people say Simone or Simeon. It's actually Simeon, but everybody calls me Sim. So you can just call me Sim. It's easy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. As I was talking, it was a great pleasure and honor to meet you in Dallas. And it was fascinating about the work that you're doing. Can you share with the audience a little bit of how and why you transitioned from being a broadcaster into someone who teaches industry and people how to communicate to large and small groups?
Sure. Yeah. My background, as you said in your lovely introduction, and thanks for that, is as a broadcaster, first of all. And I got into writing as a result of working in television. And actually, it was that moment of transitioning from being a presenter, either behind the microphone on the radio, which I did for 30 years on the BBC, or in front of a camera. Then when I started writing for television, I didn't actually immediately start writing comedy. I started writing television formats. So this is the structure of quiz shows. So I invented quiz shows for a while, like game shows.
Oh,
And to sell those, I partnered with a production company who had a sort of a distribution arm. And you and your listeners will have heard of the Cannes Film Festival, right?
yeah.
It's a big sort of hoopla in the south of France. There's the same thing for television, which is called MIPCOM, and it's like a big TV festival. And that's where people go to sell shows. And I discovered, having been a presenter and then a creator of formats, that it was going to be incumbent on me to pitch these shows to television executives from all over the world. And no one had trained me to do it. I didn't know how to do it. I watched other people do it and picked up a few basics. And as I did that for quite a few years, people would start coming to me and asking me to help write their pitches for things. So to answer your question, what led to me going from being a broadcaster to someone who helps other people to present ideas and communicate is I was asked to do it by enough people for me to eventually think, maybe I should start charging people for this. That's how that happened.
Oh, wow. So, as a pediatrician, I was never formally trained in communication. And none of the steps, not in medical school, not in residency, not after residency. And from the perspective of a physician, I have 11 years of education, 32 years of experience. I am an expert in pediatrics. Why do I need to worry about communication?
It's a really great question, and it's so true. My company, for those of your listeners who have just dropped into this and are thinking, like, who is this guy? The reason we met is because I have a communications training company that I founded with 3 of my colleagues from that world called Kindred Skills. And we work in a variety of industries, but the majority of our work is helping people in healthcare. So that's either pharmaceutical companies, maybe helping their MSL, that's medical science liaison, go and talk to HCPs like yourself, or sometimes it's the kind of work that you and I met doing, where you're helping physicians talk to other physicians. And I hear this like all the time. So I'm so aware of the truth of this, that you have people with years of expertise who have never been taught how to communicate. whether that's communicating data, communicating ideas, or even in the case of, in some cases, even just communicating bad news. Now, that is way better trained now in our country. So I'm talking to you from the UK. So we have the National Health Service here. My daughter is actually a first year medical student. She just graduated from her first year a week ago, which is very exciting.
Wow.
So I'm checking with her and say, what are they? And they, as you won't be surprised, Herb, they get a tiny amount. I think they get basically half an hour in a year on, this is the acronym you need to remember for when you have to break bad news. And there's a mnemonic they're supposed to remember to step them through it. But the kind of things that, to answer your question, why does it matter? The kind of things that I'm interested in are either, if you've got complicated data to share, how can you communicate that to an audience in a way that is engaging for a start and not boring and memorable, so they know what the key points are, and when they leave your meeting, they're able to not just remember the key points, but maybe even share them with somebody. Like, that's the goal. If you can communicate well, that's what should be happening. That's very common in your world. And the other element that I'm interested in, as well as making complex things easy to understand, I'm really interested in how you can build relationships with people, build a trusting relationship with people. So that could be with your colleagues. It could be with your team, if you're managing a team of people. It could be with the patient or the patient's family. And as so often, because you're up against it, you're super busy, you've got a million other people to go and see and things to do, those interactions are often incredibly logical and transactional. And we often forget that if you engage them in a slightly different way, you might discover things that you probably needed to know about their situation, or that might help stop you wasting time with a particular topic with those people. So I'm interested in those moments. They're often the moments near the beginning of a conversation that do a lot of that work for you, that build trust and get the audience to engage in what you've got to say.
It's incredibly important work that you do. Problem is that from a highly trained specialist, it is so difficult to understand that these aren't simple concepts for most people. I was always very good at math. I don't understand why people can't get algebra. It's like a simple concept to me. And I get incredibly frustrated, right? I don't even want to bother teaching multiplication tables. You can't learn that when you're 3 or 4. I can't help you. And the problem that happens is that when you're in the exam room, the same thing happens. When I'm talking to someone about their cholesterol or the risk for diabetes, I so understand it at a level because it's what I live every day.
Yeah.
You can forget that the person, I always say it's so much easier to be sitting in the physician side of the conversation than on the patient side of the conversation.
Yeah.
The
Well, you've
patient,
got that level of understanding. So
the patient has never heard what
yeah,
a hemoglobin A1C
yeah,
being
yeah.
5.8 range means versus 4.6. And I'm like, yeah, your hemoglobin A1C is at the 5.8. You're pre-diabetic. We need to get on this. And
Yeah.
I just destroyed the world. And they're like, they don't even know what to ask.
Yeah.
So I think we have to take a step back and welcome, Sabrina.
Hi, Sabrina. Nice to meet you.
Interrupt. I'm sorry to be late, but I've got all the teenagers home, and so my internet is crashing on a daily basis. So I had to restart the router. Apologies.
No worries, no worries. And so I think the first step in what you're trying to teach is slow down. And
A little. I think what you're describing there, Herb, is slow down is a good way of putting it, because what you're describing there is that instinct that we have as logical problem-solving creatures to jump to solution. That's what you do. The reason you've become the experts that you are is because you have years of experience of being confronted with a problem and instantly being able to solve that problem, or at least suggest a solution to that problem, right? So what you're describing there is incredibly normal, but it is often unhelpful to
Neat.
your audience. Actually, what audiences need is, rather than I acknowledge the problem and now let me tell you how I'm going to solve that problem for you, actually what audiences need just before that moment of jumping into the solution, they need a sense of, first of all, who the hell are you? Like, I need to trust you with this. And they also need a sense of, what is the desired outcome here? Where are we heading? I need to know a sense of what the goal is to then understand why this solution is the right solution. And you mentioned a really interesting thing there about, if you were in a conversation with a patient, you're very quickly able to reel off the data and tell them what the solution should be. But what we're talking about here is that moment of why. The why is what's missing there. Not just here's the solution, but here's why I'm going to talk you through this stuff. And it might be that, hey, listen, given what's going on, we've discovered some things here. So I'm going to walk you through what we think we should be doing here. But just so you're aware of what we're aiming to do, the ultimate goal here is to be able to reduce these side effects and give you a better quality of life. Might be one, right? So that's the long-term desired outcome. But you should also be doing the desired outcome for them now, like in this conversation. So you might say, I know you've had a few difficult issues with this and it's not easy and it's impacting on your social life and your ability to, I don't know, maybe your schoolwork or whatever. Ultimately, what we're aiming for is to give you a better quality of life and maybe be able to help you live a normal life. I wanted to talk you through the steps just so that you leave here today feeling reassured about how we're going to do this and feeling confident that we can actually improve this. So what you've done there is you've gone, long-term desired outcome is this. Desired outcome in the next 10 minutes is reassurance and confidence, which are benefit words, like the language matters in storytelling. So they're the moments that get the audience to trust you and to want to listen to what follows. But it's so easy to miss that. So it's really fascinating to hear you say, I think maybe slowing down would help, because it's normally that moment that we just skip straight over.
Right.
We're so used to just going problem, solution.
Right. Yes. And as we talk in Dallas, the other problem is that physicians and lawyers are self-selected to be pessimists.
You mentioned this when we met in Dallas.
It's totally true. We're always looking for the worst outcome.
Yeah.
And we cannot see that 95% of the time people have great outcomes, great lives. We're looking for what's going to kill you. And I have to make sure that doesn't happen to you.
That at least gives you the advantage when it comes to identifying the negative in the story. Basically, stories are about arcs, right? Storytelling is really simple. Everybody does it. Everybody knows it. You've been listening to stories your whole life. You've been telling stories your whole life. The basic tools of it are that a story has a hero. More on that in a moment, by the way, Herb, because you and I are going to disagree on who the hero is. But obviously a story is about someone. If you're a writer for Pixar or Disney, the hero of the story might be a bin or a toy or a robot. But in your world, the hero is a person. And the story is effectively, there's a challenge affecting that person, and they're trying to get to a better place, a desired outcome. So that arc is a negative to positive thing that everyone can do. Everyone listening to this can apply that to any setup of any conversation. You might say, I've got a real challenge of making that meeting next week, and I know that's going to affect my understanding of that topic. I want to try and find a way that I can get up to date on that topic so that I'm able to be an effective member of the team. So you're just teeing up a conversation by going, look, here's the story of why I want to talk to you, right? Sorry, my mistake. I just knocked my microphone off its stand. I'm back. Yeah, go ahead, Sabrina.
I have a question. I've been looking into a lot of your work, and the thing that keeps coming to mind is, in medicine, I think so often we forget about the story. And I think that shows up as forgetting about the patient-centered part of things. So what is their story? What's their reason for coming? What are their goals? And then I spend a lot of time with medical students and residents. And one of the things I'm always telling them when they present the case to me so that we can discuss and teach is think of the journey as a story. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about why humans and doctors specifically forget to tell a story, even though it's something that seems so native.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Why do we not do it when we know it works? When we see other people do it, the feedback is universally good. People go, that was great. I get it. Thank you for doing that. So we recognize it good, we recognize it works, and yet we choose not to. I don't think it's a choose. I think, to answer your question, I think there are some really good practical reasons why a lot of people don't do it. Sometimes they're not aware of it. It hasn't been brought to their attention that they can engage an audience in that way, and it's very quick to do. So maybe they're not aware of the tools. But I think it's things like time pressure. A thing I hear a lot from physicians when I talk to them about these tools and how they might use them, a really common pushback is, I just don't have time for this. I know I don't have time to get into story time with every single person I meet. And I totally get it. And my sort of counter to that is, I agree. You shouldn't be sitting down and treating every encounter like story time. Using storytelling tools isn't about telling a story. Not every encounter has to be laced with your anecdotes. It's about recognizing the challenge and the desired outcome in someone else's journey, basically. Whether that journey is the next 2 minutes or the next 10 years, it's about being able to summarize. That's the skill. I think time pressure is one reason. And I also think the other reason, Sabrina, is that thing that you and your students and Herb and pretty much anyone who works in a scientific industry is dogged by, which is the curse of knowledge. You have so much expertise in an area that your natural first instinct is to either impart it on others or explain it to someone or show how it can be used to solve this particular issue. And lo and behold, in any of those scenarios, what you've done is you've gone straight to logic. You've gone straight to like neocortex, new brain, explaining process and proof points and data, and this is why, and this is how. And again, I mentioned Aristotle, I think,
Yes.
when we met, and this is not new. This is 2,500 years ago that it was Aristotle who realized that actually, if you want to communicate an idea to people or get them to take a step on a journey, that logic about how this is going to work, that has to be the third thing that happens. So he actually wrote down in a book, The Art of Rhetoric, how rhetoric works. And it was him who discovered, as a speechwriter for Alexander the Great, he discovered that if you tell people the logic of what you want to explain, they just walk away. They get bored, they talk to their neighbor, they certainly don't act on it.
That's such a shame because I feel like we lead with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most people do
Yeah.
lead with that. And isn't it maddening that 2,500 years ago, we realized how this
They
stuff
knew better.
works? Yeah. So it was Aristotle who talked about ethos and pathos. So ethos, pathos, and logos is ancient Greek for the word, the message. That's the logic, right? Ethos and pathos need to come first. And ethos is establishing common ground with your audience, like demonstrating that you share the same world. This is where trust is built. So if you're with a patient, that might be, how's it been over the last couple of weeks? Tell me what you're experiencing. Okay, I hear this a lot. I've encountered this before. That's the empathy moment where you tread in their shoes for a while. Pathos is what's in it for them. There needs to be a reason for them to focus on all the logic that you want to share with them. But that's where that desired outcome statement really hits for an audience. Here's what I want you to get from our conversation. I want you to leave here feeling absolutely confident about the steps we're taking. I want you to feel reassured about where we're at with your treatment. And long term, I want you to leave here knowing that there is a better future here. We are going to get to a place where you have a much better quality of life. If they understand that, they are absolutely going to focus on everything you tell them, because the brain is going to go, I want that. How? How am I going to get that? So if you ever have issues with patients zoning out or, I don't know, not adhering to treatments or whatever, it's probably because they don't really understand the benefit to them that they're going to get if they do this stuff. Aristotle was the guy who discovered lead with that. That's the first thing they need to know. And then logos follows. So that ethos, pathos, logos, it's ancient, but it worked.
Yeah, and that was a great TED talk you gave on that topic.
Yeah.
That was phenomenal. There's a third reason, an elephant in the room, which is the psychiatrists, as you're going through medical school, teach you that you should not get involved with your patients. It's in theater, right? Or you have to have a certain emotional detachment to be able to enjoy the show. Because if you're using your rational mind, you're like, yeah, that guy is not flying because men can't fly.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens. You're supposed to detach yourself from the patient to be an objective observer of what's going on and not let your past experiences and your feelings inform your actions, because you might err just because you have melted into the patient. And it's something that's taught to you very early in medical school, that you have to have a distance from your patient and think, not feel, in order to do the best job possible.
Yeah.
And so you have to retrain yourself that in the way that you can. This is how I would sell it to physicians, is if you follow these simple steps of communication, you'll spend less time and you will have better outcomes. That's really what happens when you listen to the patient. And I like examples. So for example, in the clinic that I help, it's a very marginalized population, mostly non-white, all on government assistance. And I have two patients, a 4-year-old and a 9-month-old. The 4-year-old has been in the hospital twice for asthma. And the 9-month-old has been in the intensive care unit twice for asthma. And one of the things that we know scientifically that helps keep this patient out of inpatient wards and from having outcomes is to be on inhaled steroids. So I know that. I know you need to take inhaled steroids.
Yeah.
But what I tell the parents is my goal is to keep your kid out of the hospital. And how I'm going to do that is by making sure that we're giving them inhaled steroids every day.
Yeah.
And I'm only going to be happy if I keep your kids out of the hospital. And because I consider both these kids to be very high risk and a high potential for a bad outcome, which a bad outcome is your kid may not be with us. If you've been in the PICU twice and you're 9 months, that is very severe asthma. At the first sign of a cold, you show up to the clinic at 8:30 when it opens, and with or without an appointment, you tell them Dr. Bravo told you to get here. And we will deal with it because my goal for your child is to stay out of the hospital.
Framing of the story is exactly what we're talking about when we say use storytelling to communicate why it matters. So if you rewind the words that you said there, just to apply it to the storytelling tools that we talked about when we met at the conference, when you say, my goal is to keep your child out of hospital, that's the desired outcome. How I'm going to do that is by walking you through these inhalers is the process, right? That's the how. So you're naturally doing that. And when you talked about worst case scenario, we could lose a child here, then you're into the negative challenge, like the ultimate impact of that challenge. So all the tools are there. My advice on that stuff would be to lead with those bits, like lead with the negative and positive, and then get into the how and say, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. A child of that age that's coming into the PICU at this stage indicates we've got a problem here. Now this is rhetoric again. So this is where you go impact statements. So rhetoric, as you and your listeners know, is like a connection of stepping stones. If you had to teach your school kids, or if you were teaching your teenagers about rhetoric, Sabrina, You might say rhetoric is where somebody says to an audience, look, we all know that this is the situation we're in, right? Everyone agrees that this is the world we're in, and your audience all nod. And then you say, and the impact of that is this. Am I right? And everyone goes, yeah, that is happening. And then you do the third step, which is, and if that can happen, isn't it also possible that this can happen? And the audience go, oh my God, I hadn't thought of that. So that's how rhetoric persuasion works. It's like a 3-step journey that you take the audience on. And what you're demonstrating there is you've jumped to the third step really quickly. So you could go, listen, the situation as it stands is this. You've got a pretty poorly child coming in at this stage. If this isn't treated, this is what we've seen happen before. They get more and more sick. The slightest cold might bring them in here and they're going to be seriously ill. Ultimately, worst case scenario with a child like this, untreated, not taking the right course of medicine, they can die. That does happen. So I went, here's my 3-step journey of the worst case scenario with your child. Then you go, do the same trick on the positive side. So you go, if we can get your child on the right treatment process, the right treatment landscape, that will have the effect of keeping them healthier. They'll be able to cope when colds are doing the rounds at school. They're not going to be rushed into hospital. Ultimately, of course, we're going to have a happy, healthy child who lives a normal life. Here's how we can achieve that. Let me walk you through it. So that setup was just me doing a really quite clinical description of those 3 steps on each side.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You're already doing it, Herb. I'm just breaking it
No,
down for you.
absolutely.
You can see how that applies in the wonderful
Absolutely.
world of Aristotle.
Absolutely.
We
Go
actually,
ahead.
that's exactly what we do with adolescents, because their ability to connect sort of action and consequence is still in development. But I've never heard it described as rhetoric persuasion. It's another perspective on how we think about those conversations.
I like that, action and consequence, because that connection is a similar tool. Yeah, great observation, Sabrina, because it's really similar to that. Yeah, I like
And they're
that.
hard connections to make, I think, even for adults sometimes.
Yeah, and we always training people, like, never assume. Sometimes because you're the experts, you don't say it because to you it's obvious. And this comes back to Sabrina's point from earlier about why don't we do this stuff? And a lot of the time it's because you live in this world and it's so obvious to you that you feel either I don't need to say it, or if I say it, is it obvious? Am I patronizing them? Herb, when we were working at the conference, I often get this at conferences where I say to clinicians who have to talk to other clinicians, if you're ever anxious, when you're introducing the session, if you're ever a bit anxious that I'm not going to say that because that's just patronizing. I'm not going to say the treatment landscape is complicated because it's like they're going to go, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. If ever you find yourself with that anxiety, my thought is you should definitely say that stuff just because it gets everyone on the same page. But you just do it with those little caveat phrases like, as blah, 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 blah. Obviously, so you say these little phrases that indicate, I know you know this already, but I'm going to say it anyway, because it's those saying it moments that get everyone on the same page. So being able to say, look, as this treatment landscape is moving pretty fast, that's why I wanted to talk to you today. So it doesn't sound patronizing when you put as you know in front of it, but suddenly everyone goes, oh, we're here to talk about a fast moving treatment landscape. So never assume knowledge. Say this stuff. And if you're anxious that it's patronizing, just use those little tricks to make it not patronizing.
That's a
Great.
really helpful tip. I feel like with the level of imposter syndrome and just the level of intensity that physicians bring to their work, I think having tips like that to be able to engage in effective communication or storytelling is really helpful. I'm curious if there are ways that you think stories can be used in communicating between doctors, but in a more time efficient way. Are there tricks?
Yeah, so we'll get into that in a little.
Oh, okay.
We'll get into that in a little.
Herb's plan.
And we have a plan. I'm a doctor. I always have a plan.
I bow to Herb's greater plan. I'm gonna let you steer this one.
Yep. We are.
Um, we've beaten this one down already, but communicating is all about storytelling. And if you're not good at storytelling, you're not good at communicating. And if you're not good at communicating, you're not going to have good outcomes with your patients. That's just the reality. But what makes a good story? And I will give you 3 key words: a villain, a hero, and how do we get to a happy ending?
Okay. Good instincts. You have nailed 2 of the 3 elements of storytelling.
And then something.
You're absolutely right. So people, if you say to some school children, what's every story got? What's every story got that you need? And they'll go character. And you go, absolutely right. Who's the central character? Who's it about? And they'll go, yeah, it's about like a hero, probably. There's someone at the center of this story. So that is definitely one of the elements. I'm going to come back to the hero right in 30 seconds because it's really important to have a clear idea of who we're talking about there. But the other thing you mentioned is you said a villain. So yeah, there's some sort of negative dark force. Sometimes it's a threat. Sometimes in Harry Potter, it's like Voldemort is coming. Sometimes it's something broken. So if it's Gravity, the disaster movie, the spaceship's blown up and she's spinning off into space. So missing, broken, a threat. Missing is every rom-com. So love is what's missing. So yeah, there's a problem for the hero. Something's missing, something's broken, or there's a threat coming. The third element that you are skipping over is the really common thing that people skip over, which is the opposite of the threat, the desired outcome. If you like maths, and I think you do, Herb, then storytelling is like an equation. It should balance. What you did is jump straight to plot in solution, right? So you were very good at going, there's a villain, and then there's like a plot. There's some sort of, how do they overcome it? You only get into the plot, the journey, when the audience understands the desired outcome, which is the balance point for storytelling. So let me give you a super simple example. Let's take a disaster movie like Gravity. The film is about an astronaut. That's the hero. The problem for the astronaut is they're spinning off lost in space. The desired outcome for the astronaut is they want to get home. That's a super simple story. If you've seen the film, you'll know there's other layers to this story, but that's the simplest version of the story. Only when we understand that do we want to watch 2 hours of how that hero might overcome that challenge to achieve that desired outcome. If you've ever walked into a movie theater 20 minutes in with a feeling of not understanding that bit, you've spent the whole film going, who's that? Why does that even matter? You need that bit. If we don't understand that Harry Potter is the only person who can detect a massive evil force is coming that will destroy this brilliant world, this wizarding world he's just been introduced to, and only he, apparently, can, desired outcome, save the wizarding world. If we didn't understand that in the first chapter or 2 of the first book, we wouldn't read all 7 books. So that storytelling, you said, what makes a good story? Clarity of those 3 elements: the hero, the challenge, and the desired outcome. That's what makes a story. And the hero...
Oh, wait, before you get there.
Oh, you know what?
Before you get there.
I'm itching to get into this
We
with
have
you.
to disagree. The reason we met is because Sanofi was kind enough to invite me to train to be under Speaker Bureau for prevention on DKA, which is a horrible complication of type 1 diabetes by early on screening. So when I was writing the show notes, I identified the villain as diabetes because it kills kids, right? In my world, the pediatrician is always the hero because we try to bend that arc. And what is my desired outcome? Yes, a cure for diabetes would be the ultimate outcome, but I don't have that in my tool bag today. So I'll take a second best, which is not to see another child in DKA or die from DKA. You disagree with my hero.
I've got thoughts on it because it's a fluid thing that can change depending on perspective. Like you mentioned there, my desired outcome is this. Whereas with stories, it's not about your desired outcome. It's about the desired outcome of the audience. Really, when you're talking to somebody, it's about their desired outcome. What are your thoughts on this, Sabrina? Imagine if you're in a conversation with a colleague or a team of colleagues or a patient. Who's the hero in that moment?
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. I was going to say the same thing. I think it depends on who you're talking to. Maybe if you're talking to other providers, which Herb, I know you're doing, then it makes sense for the hero to be the physician fighting the evil diabetes. And if you're talking to a patient, perhaps it's the story's more centered in their human experience.
So these are good thoughts. I'm going to blow your minds now.
He's going to say, I don't think it blew me from England to Dallas.
There's a really easy way to identify the hero in any story at all. And I'm going to tell you what that is, and then I'm going to tell you how that applies to your world. So the hero in any story is the person who is going from a bad place to a better place. That's the journey that determines who the hero is of this story, right? Now, obviously in stories, there are lots of characters. And yes, I accept that there will be other characters who have their own little arcs going on. But essentially at the center of the story, there is somebody who has a big problem and has to get to a better place. Now, that simplifies something that can often help when you're communicating with people. Because once you understand that's what signifies who the hero is of the story, and you can apply that to any story that you know. A good example is Finding Nemo. Like, Nemo is not the hero of that film. His name's on the poster, but Nemo is like the B story. He gets taken and put in a dentist surgery at the fish tank and spends the whole film with that thing going on. Our journey that we follow is of his dad, who is trying to find Nemo, right? So it's the dad who's lost his son, and the goal is to find his son. That's the journey. He's the hero. If you've seen the film Taken with Liam Neeson, it's the same film. One's with fish, one's with guns. So the hero is the person on that journey, right? So when you are talking to a patient, if you put them in the role of hero, as in they are going from a bad place to a better place, what that makes you is an incredibly powerful story archetype, which is the helper. If you think about, let's take Gravity again as that example, like because it's so simple, it's a disaster movie. If you've not seen it, it doesn't matter. All you need to know is that there's an astronaut who's spinning off in space. There is a helper character in that film played by George Clooney. So we've got a rookie astronaut, Sandra Bullock, who's spinning off into space. George Clooney is this seasoned astronaut. He's on his last ever mission, and he's the helper. The mentor, if you like, is the kind of posh name for this character in stories. When the astronaut goes spinning off into space, if George Clooney's character said to Sandra Bullock's character, "Don't worry, I'll save you," that would make him the hero, because he's like Superman. He's sweeping in with his cape flapping to save the damsel in distress. This is not that story. Sandra Bullock is the hero of this story. So what's crucial to notice about that relationship is that George Clooney doesn't ever say, "I'm going to save you." He says, "I'm going to show you how you can save yourself." Classic mentor, imparting knowledge, skills, or tool to help someone get to a better place. That's the mentor archetype in stories. That is the classic archetype for a physician-patient relationship, where you're basically saying to the patient, "I'm going to show you what you need to do, knowledge, to get to a better place. I'm even going to give you an inhaler tool to help you get to that better place. I'm not going to see you for a few weeks, but I'm going to catch up with you in 3 weeks' time to see how you're getting on. In stories, mentors give the hero tools, knowledge, or skills to help them get to a better place, then leave and let them go for a while. But they keep popping back up in the story. So they're not alongside the hero every step of the way. That's an ally. It's a slightly different relationship. They're there, then they disappear, then they pop back up to see how they're doing and maybe give them something else that might help. So you think of Dumbledore to Harry Potter, Gandalf to Frodo, Simba's dad. Actually, quite often in stories, the mentor dies. You don't have to die, but you're doing that thing where you're going, look, let me show you the way. Let me give you some things that are going to help you get to that place. And then I'm going to leave you to it for a bit. And then I'll see you in a few weeks. So shifting your mindset from being the hero to being the mentor or the helper is hugely advantageous to helping your patient feel, first of all, empowered and trusting you. That's the gorgeous relationship that every hero wants, to have someone who's got their back and is going to look out for them and help them get to that better place. If you go in as the hero, that basically makes them the victim, the damsel in distress. Nobody wants to feel like that. Now, I said it's fluid. You are obviously the hero of your story. Of course you are. And you might also argue that if you were talking to clinicians, you would put them in the role of hero because you're helping them get to a better place. But to them, their patient should be the hero. So you can see how with perspective changes, it changes. But does that make sense, Herb? Why I said don't see yourself as the hero here?
We'll have to clarify one point, but this is to Sabrina's point. So when I thought about this example is because I'm passionate that we need to start screening children for these autoantibodies so that we can bend the arc of the outcomes in diabetes. And I'm speaking to other pediatricians. And this is a little bit of the imposter syndrome. We'll get into it a little bit more because it's really funny. When I say that pediatrician, I often don't see myself as a pediatrician. I'm speaking to pediatricians and I am trying to get them to change from where they're not even aware they can do this to where they want to go back to their offices and want to implement the plan to do this in every 2 and 4-year-old. And so they are my hero because they're the ones who are going to do the work. They're the ones that are going to get the kids to a better place. And it's funny because I'll tell you my introduction, the speech, just so you can just laugh. But that's what I was thinking of the example. But your point's very well taken. In the exam room, when I'm not educating or sharing information with colleagues, I'm really a coach. I can give you options. I can tailor the approach a little bit. I can tell you what I've seen the outcomes are if you don't follow this or that. But at the end of the day, you have to follow your own life and you have to be responsible for those consequences. And I got to go home and sleep.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. I can't force anybody to do what they don't want to do.
And and that has its echo in stories as well, because that's what a mentor is to the hero. The mentor should be, look, I'm going to show you. It happens in The King's Speech. The mentor is Geoffrey Rush, who's going to help him overcome this challenge of his speech impediment because the country is at stake on the verge of war. But there's a classic storytelling thing is that the hero rejects the mentor. If you ever have that where your patient or your colleagues are going like, to be honest, mate, I'm out. I don't need the help. You should be able to go, I get it. Let me just talk to you about why I'm sharing this with you, but I can't make you do it. So that's absolutely classic mentor behavior. That's you're in a sweet spot if that's ever happening, because the challenge that you get back is engagement. That's okay, because at least they're questioning it and they're going, I don't fully yet understand the benefit to me of following this. That's a nudge for you to go, I get it. Let me just clarify why I'm sharing this with you. This is the goal. This is the benefit to you. This is the long-term goal. I can't make you do it. I'm just giving you that as an option. What was your thought there, Sabrina?
Yes.
Just argue, and Herb, you can help me connect these dots. It's still a nascent thought, but I was going to argue that's really the crux of the art of pediatrics. I don't know, Simon, how much you know about pediatrics, but we tend to be viewed as the low man on the totem pole of medicine because for many reasons, but because of reimbursement and we're in primary care. But the real art of what we do is in engaging with the parent and the child. Often we're engaging with multiple stakeholders in the
Yeah.
room and trying to really shift the perspective of the story to both of them, which is
Yeah.
a really hard thing to do. So you
Yeah.
just explained to us how difficult it is even to conceptualize who's the hero, who's the villain, what's the desired outcome in a regular story. But we're trying to do that for the child, for
Yeah.
the parent, for any other stakeholders in the family. And so there's real magic in that. And when Herb says that pediatricians are heroes, that's what he's referring to, because it's surprisingly a really difficult thing to do, to shift the story so that it is relevant and compelling to all the individuals that you're trying to interact with.
Totally. And I think the pediatricians that you are your colleagues should be heroes to you. The only thing I was just putting a red flag up for is don't make yourself the hero. But you're absolutely right that the people that you're helping, they definitely are heroes on going on their little journey to be better and to be able to save lives. And by the way, Sabrina, I totally love what you're describing there, because here's me going, stories are simple. And yeah, like we get that stories are pretty simple if you break them down to these elements, but life is not simple. Like life is complicated. And the skill level, and this is what my company, Kindred Skills, this is what we help physicians and pharma people with all over the world, is actually the nitty gritty of how this works in a real life situation. Because if you take your example, Sabrina, apps couldn't agree more. Your job in that moment with multiple stakeholders in the room, let's imagine you've got the child and the parent and maybe a clinician who's looking after them on a nurse, say. Let's say it's a nurse practitioner. So you've got 3 people in the room, right? The perfect story for those people would be something like, here's the context of why we're in the room. This is the challenge we've found for the child. Are you feeling that? And the child would go, yeah, I am. And that must be difficult for you at home, right? Mum, and the mum goes, yeah, it's having these effects. I know it's hard for you, nurse practitioner, to keep across all this as well. So the reason I wanted to get us all together today is so that we could try and find a way through to be able to help you have a better quality of life. Child, we would love for you to be able to feel better. What would you like to get from this? And they'll go, I'd like to be able to go to school every day. Well, let's make that the goal. So for you, Mum, I really want you to leave here feeling reassured about the steps that we're taking. And for you, nurse practitioner, some clarity on the way forward is my goal in this meeting. That's what I'm aiming for. How does that sound? And they'll all go, yes, please. I want that thing. So you've basically told 3 desired outcome statements to 3 different stakeholders. And you've done it in 30 seconds, right? So you're right. This is complicated. But actually all you're doing here, I'm saying all you're doing, all I did there, I'm making this up, but all I did there is go negative, positive. How does that apply to each person? Know your audience is the key to this. So if you've got a mixed audience, you should be trying to do this stuff for everyone in the room. If you've got a group of mixed audience, if you're doing a session to clinicians or maybe your colleagues, maybe you've got, I don't know, maybe you've got marketing or commercial, or who knows, you've got to do a little presentation. People often say to us, how do I do that stuff you're describing, the storytelling introduction, when I've got such a mixed audience? And it's another version of what I just did there, but you acknowledge it. You be transparent about it. Don't hold this burden within. You can say to your audience, this is quite a complicated presentation because we've got so many diverse people in the room today. There might be bits that don't apply to all of you, but there'll be something in this that definitely helps everyone in the room. So for commercial, you might hopefully get some clarity on how this affects you in the marketplace. For the clinicians here, I'm going to help you understand that there are some more choices available when you meet these patients. So you give examples of desired outcomes for this diverse audience. But that's where the magic happens with those skills. That's what makes you like an elite communicator, when you can just dash that stuff off. People love you for it.
And
Yeah.
what I'm thinking as you're talking is that it almost feels like in comparison to speaking, and Herb, tell me if you agree with this, but in comparison to speaking or trying to persuade colleagues, other pediatricians or other physicians, persuading or speaking or communicating with parents and children is relatively easy. The term that I often hear thrown around is it's like herding cats to try and get physicians to agree on something.
Right.
And so I personally, I would love to have you role play a situation where we need to convince, for instance, a lot of the listeners probably either lead their group of pediatricians or they're doing something innovative and trying to corral other physicians to change their behavior in some way. Hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
Hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go on, Herb. Go on. I've got
So-
some thoughts on that, but what were you going to
Okay.
say, Herb?
That's a very difficult question because that is really change management. And part of what is so difficult in change management is usually the leaders are older. And what they have been doing for many years has resulted in tremendous success. That's why they're still leading the organization. And now you're asking them to change that mindset. And in the business world, they call it killing your cash cow. The best companies are the ones that really take their cash cow. Like an example would be Apple. If Apple could destroy the iPhone and come up with a market buster that was bigger than the iPhone, that's an excellent example of a company reinventing itself, and they always keep growing. The companies that die are the ones that say, I have the iPhone, it's tremendously well liked, it makes oodles of money. I don't need to think about what the customer will need next. I got it. And then someone comes up with that something else. So that's a very difficult persuasion. That's the first thing you have to beat. When I find myself when I'm presenting on T1D on behalf of Sanofi because of all the education they gave me, and they brought people in to teach me how to do this, that I can persuade them pretty quickly. And so I always start this, and this is where I have a little bit of imposter syndrome, and it cracks me up. I really don't see myself as the 50-something-year-old. I still think I'm a kid. And I start out because Sim said, presenting yourself is where you win or lose the audience. That first step. And I start out very simple. I'm an immigrant in this country. Somehow I got lucky enough to be a pediatrician. Really unbeknownst to me, I now have a podcast with someone named George Rogel, who for a year of the podcast, we had never been in the same room at the same place at the same time. And for no really particularly anything else but luck, some tremendously awesome woman called Brenda Saxon from Sanofi texted me out of the blue one day and asked if I would have Kimber Simmons in my podcast, a world-renowned diabetes expert in Denver who has diabetes since she was 9 years old. And now I'm here doing a podcast with Sim, who has been a BBC broadcaster, has 3 books, and on top of that, does the comedian rounds and teaches huge companies, huge, with 100,000 employees. How do you communicate? I really don't know how I got so lucky to be standing in front of you. But here we go. Let's talk about it.
That's your little hero's journey right there. With you as that you're the hero of your journey, remember? So yeah, that's a good example of that.
And it's heartfelt. That's how I feel. I feel tremendously lucky to have you in the show and to have met you. And I feel extremely lucky when I'm talking to other doctors. And I just feel lucky that I'm there and that I can share information with them. And I think that's how I start. If you're talking about changing the process of a practice, it is very difficult because that introduction will buy you nowhere because there's 2 people in that room who will destroy you. And you'll have to keep coming back and showing them more data and showing them incremental changes that improves their practice. And over time, you gain their trust. And over time, they change. But the changing the management of an organization is much more complex. question than communicating well.
I can give you a tip from stories, if you like,
Yes.
on persuading someone to take a journey that they might not want to take. Everything that we've spoken about up to now is still in play, by the way. So if you're trying to persuade people, you absolutely need to get them to understand why this matters and what the desired outcome might look like. Because they may not be aware that there's a challenge. So they may be like, you know what, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Why do I need to change? So even more reason why you need to set up this little meeting or presentation with a sense of, you might think everything's fine, and it's great that some of those things are going well. However, there is this little thing going on that if we address it, impact will be this. Long term, that's what we could be looking at. So you need to tell the story that we demonstrated earlier of what is the negative and what is the potential impact of that negative. And then quickly go, if we can address it, this is what good looks like. Don't tell them how. You're just saying this is a goal worth aiming for. Once you've done that, they're way more likely to go, okay, let's hear your grand plan then. They'll reluctantly brain be thinking because they get why the journey matters. Let's say you walk them through that. I'm sure you'll take lots of pushback and questions and things. If you get to a point where you're wrapping this meeting and you think, I can't expect these people to make a massive change, that this one meeting isn't going to change hospital protocol. All I want to do is get them to take the first tiny step. What has been demonstrated over thousands of years, and that's why it's in stories, is that the way to make that happen is for the mentor, that's you, to get the hero to just take a safe, simple first step that has no jeopardy. So you will see this, your listeners will know of a film called Star Wars. Star Wars, the first one, the 1977 one, with Luke Skywalker, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is the mentor in that film. So he doesn't kick off Star Wars. If you think about that first film, imagine if Obi-Wan Kenobi said to Luke Skywalker, who's just a farmer at this stage, listen, there's all sorts of bad stuff going on in the galaxy. Here's what I need you to do. I need you, farm boy, to learn how to fly a spaceship and then find this big star. It's called the Death Star. It's got a scary name. Find Darth Vader. He's your dad, by the way. You'll need to kill him, then blow up this Death Star. Thanks. Off you go. They're never going to do it, right? They're never going to do it. What happens in stories is the mentor says to the hero, look, here's what's going on. Here's what I need you to do. I'm going to give you some knowledge. I'm going to give you some expertise. The first step is this. In Star Wars, it's just take this droid to the next planet. That's all you've got to do. They'll take it from there. Gandalf says to Frodo, take this ring just to the pub in the next village. There is some bad stuff going on, but I'm not expecting you to solve that. I just want you to do this. That's how you get the hero to start their journey. And it's true in life as well as in stories. So the art of persuasion is do everything we've talked about, get them to understand why this matters, walk them through your proposed plan. Obviously, you'll take questions and we can talk about facilitation on another podcast if you like. But the way to wrap that up is with a simple first step. So all I need you to do as a result of what you've heard today is this. And it might be just take a look at this website, which is how another hospital has made this change. And give me your first thoughts on it is all. Take a look at it and get back to me by the end of the week if you've got any questions. So there's no jeopardy. They just go, okay, I can do that because that's non-committal. But lo and behold, what you've done is you've got them positively thinking about taking that journey. That's the key from storytelling to that art.
Yeah, the psychologists call it SMART goals. Small, measurable, actionable goals. And that works very good in the exam room. If you ask a person to go on a diet, lose 25 pounds, exercise 4 times a week, they will never get off the couch.
Yeah.
But if you ask them, all I need you to do is walk 2 blocks every day with your mom or dad, 2 blocks. And I'm telling you every day because you're going to miss out. You're going to miss 3 or 4 a week. you're still walking 3 days a week. And I'm good with that. And that's just hard to say no to that. Such a simple,
Yeah.
small step that everybody can do, everybody can measure.
Simple, small, and safe.
Yeah.
That's the easy way to remember that the close of your ask for your audience.
That's great because doctors love acronyms.
Yeah. Like
Three S's. We can
three
remember that.
S's. Simple, small, and safe. Yeah. There you go.
And we've talked about this before today, and you did a wonderful job at the presentation. But if you're going to present complicated data, whether it's to colleagues, administrators, leaders in industry, or your patient, stop. Warn them that the data to come might be a little difficult to understand, but we're going to walk through it together. And I think that was that was an incredible piece of mentorship that you gave me, and I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
That pause is incredibly important.
Yeah, we took a complicated slide from the slide deck that you guys were going to have to be presenting. One of the most complex, just so we could try the tools out. And the tools are really simple for people to remember. This is a strategy for when you have to present really data-heavy, complex slides. I'm a big fan of, in a perfect world, those slides wouldn't exist. But I also worked in healthcare long enough to know they do. And sometimes they are the slides that you just have to work with. So you can think of it as these little stages. Tell the story of the slide first. Before you even show it to them, just tell the story of what it is. So you can go, I'm about to show you a slide which demonstrates the efficacy of this treatment in our recent trial and how quickly it started to have an effect. There you go. That was me telling the story of the thing I'm about to show you, because now you've primed the audience about what to expect. Then you bring it up, and you still don't zoom into the detail. When you bring it up, the next thing you do is orient them. So orientate the audience to the elements that are in front of them, because it's a busy slide, remember? So you might need to go, so look, there's a lot going on here. There's a graph on the left. On the right, you can see there's a pie chart. Don't worry about that for now. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Let me just focus you on the graph, and I'm still not going into the detail. I'm going to go, this is what the axes show on this graph. So up the side, you can see that's the number of patients. And along the bottom, there's a timeline there. Then you do the legend. So the green line shows those people who were on the treatment. The brown line is those in the placebo group. All of that is just orienting. And the reason you do it is because your audience are doing it anyway, but most of the time, you're just talking at them and distracting them while they're trying to make sense of this thing. So you do it with them. You do it with them. Most people forget to do it because they know their slides so well. So they just bring up the slide and zoom straight in on the key point. But your audience don't have that advantage. So you have to take, it's normally only 5 seconds, just to go, hey, look, here's what's going on here. It's this on the right. Don't worry about the stuff at the bottom. Let me draw your attention to this. And then the third step is guide. So you tell the story, you orient, and you guide. And guide is just zoom in on the be a good guide. Like, here's the important bit of information I want to draw your attention to. And that's where you literally use your finger or your hand or your mouse if you're online. So that's the 3 steps. And I demonstrated it at the conference.
You did a wonderful job. You did a wonderful job. It was a Kaplan-Meier curve.
Oh, yeah, it was a Kaplan-Meier curve. That's right. I had to learn about those to be able to.
Are extremely difficult chart to understand.
Yeah, it was a good moment. I always have a great there's always a great feeling of jeopardy for me when I do if I do a keynote at a conference like that in front of 300 physicians, and one of the things that they want me to do is talk about complex slides. I have that moment where I have to then, and I always caveat it by saying, hey, listen, I am not a physician. Here's my best go at this. But yeah, I enjoy the challenge because it demonstrates that the tools do work. And most people, it often gets a round of applause because most people go, that was really clear. So
yes. I was going to ask you if you have any anecdotes, because you're a father, of going, and I know in England, you don't really see the pediatrician. You see a family doctor or
GP,
general,
yeah.
and where you felt that with one of your children, I know you have one daughter, I don't know if you have more children, but if you have more,
I've got 3 daughters. Yeah.
3 daughters, if there was one time that you went to the doctor with a sick daughter and you thought, they just didn't know how to communicate with me.
Yeah, the most common thing that I think comes up when I look back over those encounters, and I've become more aware of it as I've worked in healthcare and communication training, which for me has only been since like 2015 that I've really been immersed in that world. So 9 years. My daughters are now 27, 25, and 23. I go back a long way with hospital visits, inevitably. But one of the ones that really strikes me is of a time when it was the lack of a why. A daughter of mine was very ill, and they'd put her in a room, and they'd given her something that, and they were never coming to check on us, never coming to check on us. And I kept going to find them, and I was like, shouldn't a doctor, because a doctor hadn't been in yet. It was just like a practicing nurse or something. And I kept going, 4 hours passed, and I kept going and finding them, and no one would give me like, yeah, they're coming, yeah, they're coming, yeah, they're coming. And I was getting more and more frustrated, and she was getting sicker and sicker. And I only found out later, when the doctor arrived, that the thing they'd given her needed 4 hours to do its thing before they could see what was going on. But no one had told us. So again, no why. And so my experience of where doctors sometimes slip up with thinking of my children, as you said, is, again, it's that leap to process. This is the process. And then they walk away. And in that example, it left us really frustrated because we didn't know why we were being ignored. We didn't know why we'd been left here for these hours and hours. If someone had said, look, here's what's going to happen and here's why, I'd have gone, okay, see you in 4 hours. But instead, I spent 4 hours going out of my mind. But I think that's a good example of something Sabrina mentioned right at the start of this podcast, which is that habit, if you like, of just going straight to process. And if a doctor had just stepped back and gone, look, here's the why. Here's why we're doing this. It needs to do this, and that'll give us this. And that's the goal. And I'd have gone, oh, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think probably the one that comes to mind, Herb, anyway.
Yeah, that would have been very difficult as a parent, not understanding why things are being done. And so at least I have received a lot of training. I've been very lucky. And in the emergency room and the urgent cares, we have the expectation that a physician will see you within 15 minutes of arrival. And even some of that is just very, hi, how are you? When Bravo, I'm here to take care of your child. You're on the queue, but it's going to take us a while to get the tests that we need. I'll come back when we have those tests and we'll talk some more. And then I walk out. And it's a 30-second, I know you're here. We haven't forgotten about you, but right now you're really in a very low priority because you're not very sick. And so I need to do that strep throat test before we talk anymore. And that's incredibly important. The time is 15 minutes. If you wait more than 15 minutes, you'll lose your audience, which is your patient. And the other thing that we do in every ER or urgent care we're worked or consulted for is we take all the clocks out of the rooms because people stare at the clock and every minute becomes an eternity. It does. It's just human nature. I know, but if the clock is right on the wall, they're looking at the clock and like, another minute went by. Nothing else has happened. But these are all things that can be learned to improve communication and outcomes, which are not very difficult. They're not time consuming. They just take intentionality and learning habits so that you're still efficient, you still do good, and people still walk away feeling that you took care of them as human beings.
But the majority of the problem, and certainly from a patient's perspective, is lack of communication, not even quality of communication. To Sim's point, we just fail to do that. I think we talked, Herb, in past episodes about this idea of having physicians or any healthcare worker spend some time as a patient.
Yes.
Just develop the empathy one needs to understand what type of communication or even when communication is needed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We miss that so often.
we
Yeah.
do. So, Sam, who are your clients today, and why and what did they hire you to do?
We train across a broad range of industries. Most of it is healthcare, just percentage wise. A lot of it is in healthcare, pharmaceutical companies, physicians, things like that. But we also train in engineering, in tech companies, marketing companies, things like that. So it's a broad range of clients all over the world. The work is always about helping people to connect and collaborate, really. So we call it communication skills training, but really what you're helping people do is build a human connection with another person or with a group of people. And that, to answer your question about what kind of work does that involve, it's really broad. Sometimes, like before I'm with you guys today, I was helping executive diploma students at a business school write their pitches to be able to pitch their ideas. So some of it is persuasive pitch writing. Some of it is presenting skills, how to feel confident in front of a room full of people, how to have gravitas. Sometimes we're helping physicians who are going to be on stage at a conference deliver those kind of skills that you see from a great TED talker. We sometimes are training people in those sort of skills. The most common healthcare work that we work in both commercial and in medical affairs, but the most common work that we do is helping the people that you guys are probably getting pestered by, the medical scientists who are in the medical side of a pharmaceutical company and have to have meetings with HCPs about their product, but they want to be able to build a relationship so that the HCP sees them as someone who's neutral, someone who can help, someone who doesn't mind talking about the competitor treatments, because they're not there to sell. Of course, they're not allowed to. But a lot of people struggle to build that trusting relationship and to seek insights from another person. So questioning and listening skills is a big part of what we work with. And I love all that. We've talked today about storytelling, which is obviously my background as a writer, but as a broadcaster, I spent a lot of my life facilitating a discussion. You have a round table of dignitaries, MPs, protesters, whoever, and it's your job to facilitate a discussion. I love those skills, like understanding questioning levels, unearth opinion as well as fact from people. So we do quite a lot of training around those skills because it's the quickest way for somebody to understand another person. You're up against the clock, right? If you've only got a couple of minutes with a patient before you move to the next one, rather than wasting time with the wrong questions, maybe with just 2 questions, you can get absolutely to the heart of what matters to this person, which will probably save you time with what you were about to tell them. If you can seek to understand another person in a pretty short amount of time, it is massively going to save you time with the things you were going to share, because you're suddenly able to go, oh, I now know what's relevant and what's important to you. So let me tailor what I was going to say. But we do a lot of work around that. Does that answer your question? It was quite a long
That's
answer.
fascinating work. That facilitation is so needed in our. I don't know how things are in England right now, but in America, the facilitation where people are stop shouting at each other and are actually listening to each other, understanding some feelings are not going to change because of your history. And whenever you bring up certain subjects, like for example, I'm not Jewish, but I totally empathize with my Jewish colleague because they experienced a Holocaust and we can never forget that. And whenever you even remotely get close to denying that experience of humanity, it makes them very nervous and they have a good reason to be nervous. But we often forget to understand where people are coming from, why they're acting the way they're acting. And we just want to impose our will on them, on our solutions. And we need more facilitation, more listening, more kindness, because
more curiosity.
Curiosity is very important.
Be curious. That
Yeah.
should be at the heart of everything that we're talking about here, certainly with patient relationships,
Yeah.
also with colleagues, of course, but certainly with a relationship with a patient. Like, stay curious. And what I find interesting about curiosity is that scientists are curious. You wouldn't have got into science if you weren't curious. But so often, once you're in your job and you have to just motor through 1,000,000 tasks in a day, the curiosity goes out of the door. But if you can remind yourself to be curious about the person sitting opposite you, it's going to massively help you ask the right question.
Yeah. What else do you think the US-based pediatrician should know about communication that I didn't ask?
You asked some great questions. What can I say? If I were to sum up the key messages, here's me giving it a go, it would be know your audience. Obviously, that sounds obvious, but everything that you say should change depending on how much they know about you, how much they know about the topic. So really be aware of your audience, and based on that, communicate to them the desired outcome of the thing we're going to talk about right now and the long-term desired outcome. If you can do both of those things every time you sit down and talk to somebody, within that first sort of 30 seconds, you're massively going to help them engage with everything that follows, which is all the data and the logic and the process. If you can, within that, demonstrate that you get their world, that's also brilliant. That's ethos. So there you go. I didn't sum it up very neatly, but
That's
that
great.
they would be my parting thoughts.
I have one question within that. What role does humor play in that gathering of trust?
Humor is a tricky one because we get asked about this a lot, certainly with regard to presenting. Should I use jokes? I think it's pretty dangerous. I'm a comedy writer, and I've seen comedy bomb a lot.
Yeah.
And if you misjudge it, you will have to work 10 times harder to win back that person's trust. So I tend to steer people away from using humor as a device. Like, I always open with a bit of a joke. Actually, replace humor with warmth, and that's going to work. So rather than being like that, hey, the wacky doctor who always starts with a joke, actually just be warm and smiley and friendly. Any humor that comes out of that will probably be really natural, like self-deprecating or whatever. It'll be like, wow, look at me, I've got gravy down my nice white coat again. So self-deprecating humor in that warmth is going to work really well with a person that you've never met before. Whereas I've got a great joke that I'm going to share with this person can often not really work to build trust.
Because there's this line in that slide deck that you helped me through where it's all the side effects of the medication. And it says, pregnant women do not use. Basically, that's the gist of it. And I just turned to the other pediatricians in the room and said, thank God I don't take care of any of those. Let's move on to the next side effect.
Great. Yeah.
And I always laugh for things.
Yeah. That's a good example of knowing your audience, right?
Yeah.
Because that joke would only work with those.
With pediatrician, where you don't take care of pregnant
So
women.
there you go. You've made a nice example there of knowing your audience.
And then out of your books, which one do you think people should read first?
Out of my books?
Yes.
Wow. I would suggest if you're interested in story, I wouldn't necessarily read my books. I can show you my books if people are watching.
Yes.
I always have them here because when I do my credibility, I go, so I wrote this book and I wrote this book. The Long and Whining Road is the big award winner. That's had like lots and lots of 5-star reviews on Amazon. That's about the year I drove around the world with my 3 young kids and my wife in a camper van, playing Beatles songs in every country, raising money for UNICEF. That's a comedy memoir that did very well. The other one, All Hollow, is a thriller. It's a bit of a different genre. I would suggest if people are interested in story, the further reading, obviously you can go to our website, which is kindredskills.com, to find out about the work we do. Chris Vogler is the guy who wrote the Bible on storytelling. He lifted basically the work of somebody called Joseph Campbell, who was well-renowned as a philosopher, who wrote a thing called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. He was the guy who first came up with the idea of hero's journey, which we've talked about today. But Chris Vogler was the guy who worked at Disney. And needed to write like an idiot's guide to how that worked. And he hand wrote one and photocopied it and gave it out to the writers. And it just blew their minds, and everyone loved it so much that he then built it into a proper book. I think that was called The Writer's Journey. That's where I would point people. I always point people to there. If they go, where can I read more about how all this storytelling stuff works? I go to the Chris Vogler book is brilliant. That's The Writer's Journey.
And your TED Talk?
Oh, I do. Yeah, by all means, go and have a look on TED.com. My name's Simeon Courtie. I did a TED Talk in my little town. So it's not a glamorous one like San Francisco. It's literally in a little church with quite poor camera quality. But yeah, it's on the TED website. I did a talk about how Aristotle and comedy are linked. So it basically says the structure of a joke is exactly the same structure as Aristotle was talking about when he wrote the Art of Rhetoric. So it's basically that. That's, in a nutshell, I tried to fuse my two worlds of storytelling and joke writing.
It's a brilliant topic.
That's a really very cool TED Talk. It really is fascinating, extremely engaging.
Oh,
and
thank
it teaches you a lot.
Thank you.
A lot.
Although, here's my beef with it. Because it was very low rent, right? It's quite a small, it's only on TEDx, right? They only had mics on us. There was no audience mic at all. And the mics, if you watch TED Talks, they're the little microphones that are on people's faces. They're right next to your mouth. But the result of that, it's fine if you're doing a TED Talk where all you're doing is delivering your thoughts. But mine had a lot of laughs in it. I told a lot of jokes. And every time I tell a joke, there's silence that follows.
No credit for your joke.
It sounds like no one's laughing. If they were, like the audience are laughing, but because there was no audience mic, I watched it back on their website and I watched it going, it sounds like I'm bombing. Like, just no laughter. But I assure you, it's the microphone.
The other thing that was a problem with that talk is that there was 3 microphones, and it was incredibly distracting to me because I'm very detail oriented. You had one over here, you had one dangling.
Oh yeah.
And then you had one that you want to talk to when you were telling the joke.
Yeah, because I wanted a visual to look like I was a stand-up comic. So every now and again, I grab a stand-up comic mic and do a joke, and then I put it down and do a bit more.
And then you know,
that blew your mind a bit.
That distracted me. Then the lighting casted a shadow, which is a no-no in all photography and all video camography. That is like a no-no. If you see a shadow, it is a rookie person behind the camera, and they have no business photograph. Isn't that true? It's not supposed to have a shadow.
I mean, I'm not responsible for that.
And then I looked and, oh my God, that's a church.
Yeah. We're in a church.
I can see the altar behind you.
Yeah.
But it was a fascinating talk, and I watched it at least 3 times. It's really,
thank you. That's very kind. Thank you.
people should see that.
Thank you. Great. I think they can at least add a laugh track in the post-production.
Yes, I agree.
It's not a big ask.
Come on, Ted.
Any other thoughts, Sabrina, before we let Sim go? Because
No,
it's a bit of a time.
It's so great getting the chance to talk to you. I want to work with you one-on-one. Is that possible?
Yeah, we're online at kindredskills.com, and we work one-to-one. One of my colleagues, Steve, is working with an American physician one-to-one at the moment, doing it all online. He's coming over to the UK, actually. He's going to do a face-to-face with Steve while he's in the UK. We also travel all over the world. So we work with teams. Mainly it's with groups of people, but yeah, we also do one-to-one. So yeah, get in touch. We're always open to hearing from people who've got any little challenges, or if they've got things coming up that they want help with, then we love to hear about it.
Real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for your time,
It's an absolute pleasure to be on your podcast. Lots of luck with it going forwards. I think it's a brilliant idea, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, our pleasure. Good luck to England tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you both. Love that. That was great.